Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Carolina Caring Foundation, I want to welcome you to the Art of Caregiving. We are so grateful that you have joined us tonight to honor and explore the profound journey of caregiving, an experience that touches so many lives with both tenderness and resilience. This month is special. November is the month we celebrate National Caregiving Month, as well as Palliative and Hospice Care Month. This evening is about more than just a film. It's about the people behind the care, the family members, professionals, and volunteers who show up every day after day with compassion, strength, and love. It's about the art that emerges from caregiving, the quiet gestures, the shared stories, the moments of grace in the midst of challenges. We're proud to present the PBS documentary Caregiving, directed by Bradley Cooper, which beautifully captures the emotional landscape of caregiving in America. It's a film that invites us to listen, reflect, and recognize the dignity and humanity in every caregiving relationship. Following the screening, we'll hear from a panel of voices, caregivers, clinicians, and advocates who will share their insights and experiences. We hope this evening sparks conversation, connection, and a deeper appreciation for those caregivers among us. Thank you to our partners, including Arts Culture Catawba, the Hickory Museum of Art, and the James and Louise Brannick Estate, whose support made tonight possible. And thank you to each of you being here, for showing up, for caring, and for helping us celebrate the art of caregiving. Let's begin.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Tate, and I'm with Carolina Caring. And tonight, I have the privilege of being your moderator for a conversation that explores the many facets of caregiving through the lens of emotional, physical, spiritual, and societal impacts. As Tara mentioned earlier, our guest panelists bring a unique perspective, not only from their professional expertise, but also from their own personal experiences with caregiving. As they make their way to the stage, I do want to let you know that we will not have a formal question and answer after this conversation, but they will be available outside the auditorium in the boardroom if you have any questions or would just like. All right, I'd like to introduce our guest panelists to you. We have Mary Mitchell, who serves as the Family Caregiver Support Administrator with the Western Piedmont Council of Government Area on Aging. We have Vince Bartolome, Chapter Coordinator with Adult Children of Aging Parents. Carolyn Dowdy, President and Founder of Caregiver Mental Wellness. Annette Walker, Director of Grief Services with Carolina Caring. And Pastor Tamika Garrison, Director of Community Relations with Carolina Caring. Welcome, and we thank you for being with us this evening. When I was watching the documentary, I found that it was validating in so many ways for caregivers and the important role that they play. It was also eye-opening on many levels, one of which is the caregiving crisis, which they talked about. I believe it was actually referred to as the simmering crisis. With the advancement in healthcare and technology, people are living longer, which increases the number of people who will need care, which drives up the cost. Several of the families interviewed in the documentary remarked that they were concerned about the high cost of caregiving and how they were going to afford it. So Mary, for us locally, what does the data tell us here about the hidden cost of caregiving?
That's the one thing that I think that a lot of us don't realize is that there are a number of hidden costs with caregiving. And so many times our caregivers who are caring for a loved one, they either have to start, let's say if they're employed full-time, they have to go part-time. They may have to stop working to stay home. And I think that, as we all know, that was mentioned in the documentary several times of caregivers who could no longer work, and they needed to be at home to care for their loved one, and there weren't a lot of outside resources to help them with doing that. And so caregivers many times are when they have to stay home with their loved one now, they're losing their retirement savings. They're spending their retirement savings. They no longer have an income coming in, and so that longevity of being able to move toward retirement is lost a lot of times, and caregivers aren't really sure what to do. One thing that is astonishing is that we have 2.3 million, it is estimated, 2.3 million caregivers just in North Carolina alone that are caring for a loved one. That translates to those who are employed. It is estimated 6 in 10 caregivers are also trying to work full-time or part-time while caring for a loved one. And to balance all of that and juggle the financial strain that comes on the family is very challenging. It's very challenging. And I know that it was mentioned that in North Carolina is one of the 10 states where caregivers are compensated. And with that, I did want to mention that because in North Carolina, that program is through Medicaid. So if someone has applied for Medicaid and they're qualified for Medicaid, they can also apply for care. The caregiver can apply for a program with their loved one to be compensated if they are accepted into that particular program. Yeah.
And Mary, what about the VA? Are there resources available through the VA?
That's one thing that I want caregivers to be aware of if they're caring for someone who is a veteran. And as you could see from the documentary, there were so many advances that have been made for those veterans who are with us, who need extra help, extra care. And yes, I encourage caregivers to contact your local VA and see if your loved one would qualify for these resources. And they have a wonderful program for caregivers who are caring for someone. And it could be someone who cared for someone years ago, who was in the military years ago, who can receive these services, and for the veteran, but also for the caregiver as well.
That's wonderful information. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
I think it's important to point out as well is that caregiving isn't just for the elderly. It's for all ages, which was pointed out in that documentary.
Yeah.
I'm curious, with those who are in attendance here, how many of you, by raising your hand, how many of you are currently caregivers or have been caregivers? Yeah, just about everybody in this room. So this documentary and this information really hits home for us. And Vince, as we look at the number of people that are just in this room who have been impacted by caregiving, I can't help but think of the term that we hear often, and certainly one that I fell into several years ago, which is the sandwich generation. The adults who are raising their children and caring for their parents at the same time. And I know this is something that is very close to you. Can you tell us about your work and then what resources you have available through that?
Yes, the sandwich generation is something that most people probably understand what that is. And that's the position that we find ourselves in where we're caring for an aging parent, caring for another loved one, but then we've also got children that we care for too. And there were several episodes in the program that illustrated that.
Thank you. And can you tell us about what you do with ACAP?
So in 2025, AARP did a report that shows there's an estimated 63 million unpaid caregivers in America, and I think that coincides with some of what we saw tonight. That represents an economic value of $600 billion. Women overwhelmingly are the majority of the caregivers, and this leads to sacrifices in their careers, lower lifetime earnings, less retirement savings, and lower benefit periods. Again, that was alluded to in this film. There's little to no training in the art of caregiving, and we find ourselves in caregiving in an interesting way. What started as a weekly grocery store run, or perhaps taking someone to the doctor, all of a sudden we're knee deep in it and we're doing everything. So there are two women here in the Hickory area Francis Hall and Dr. Jane Everson that started a program called Adult Children of Aging Parents. They realized that as they were caring for children, husbands, and their parents, that they could not pour from an empty cup. So they took this on among their friends and tried to learn what they could of caregiving, but they wanted to share it also. So they started ACAP Community, which is a 501c3 program, and that was founded in 2012. Most people around here understand it to be ACAP Hickory, and it's a nationally validated curriculum that offers educational programs, resources, and support tailored specifically for children or adult children of aging parents. We offer a wealth of resource and support, and we're currently located in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Georgia, New Jersey, Minnesota, and Missouri. These events feature local content experts and resources from local businesses covering a broad range of caregiving topics. And whether you attend in person or you can explore the extensive online offerings, you'll find award-winning audio podcasts and our free YouTube channel, which shows previously recorded programs. So we're open to all. While ACAP's primary focus is on adult children, we welcome anyone. And we're a growing community. We've had over 12,000. We have sign-in sheets at our meetings, and then we also have annual conferences. We've had over 12,000 attendees at our meetings, and to teach them how to care for aging parents or anyone else and prepare for their own caregiving.
Thank you, Vince. That's great information and insight. And when you think about caring for your parents, I go back to the documentary and the young woman who was caring for her father. And she spoke of how she was on this roller coaster of emotions, watching her father decline and trying to figure out how she was going to live her life without him in it. And then there was the young man who was caring for his wife, raising their 3-year-old child. And I was very moved because he's sitting in his car and he's screaming. I mean, he's literally screaming with tears. And he talks about how he's been robbed of a normal life. So you've got two different ends of the spectrum, right? You've got this one grieving the life he'd hoped for with a young wife, and the other one grieving what her life will look like without her father. And Annette, I know in the work that you do, you see this often. So can you tell us about this kind of grief and what the impact it can have on others?
Well, often the grief prior is referred to as anticipatory grief. It's the grief that starts when your loved one receives a diagnosis that changes his or her life and therefore changes yours also. But what it looks just like grief. And grief looks and is messy. I loved it in the video when the man did scream in the car, because you have a wide range of feelings, from anger and shock and numbness to sadness. Sometimes they're not even words to put into what you're feeling. There's often feelings of guilt and regret, along with some of peace and joy in those times. One that I often hear from caregivers that shows up is frustration because we're not doing it as well as what we want to do when we don't hardly know what we're doing. Grief also impacts you physically. Grief makes you exhausted. It takes your energy and leaves you feeling drained and tired. Cognitively, it impacts how you think, You feel kind of foggy-headed, and you are often forgetful and feeling confused. I think one of the other couple things with grief and its impact on caregivers is just how often they feel helpless and hopeless, and a really deep sense of loneliness that often goes with grief. You can't get out as often as you want, and your time's consumed with caregiving, and you feel very isolated. Often like no one knows what I'm going through, especially during long days and lonely nights, and I'm just here all by myself. I think there's also times when you have those feelings of, when will this be over? Or maybe when there is peace, and then you feel guilty because you think about that. And I just encourage people to give themselves some grace, because all of those roller coaster, as they say in the documentary, and I use that often, that roller coaster ride of emotions, it's normal. And those feelings that you have, feelings are feelings. And we have all of those and so many different ones because we needed them. So they're not anything that's right or wrong, good or bad. They're there because you need them to experience what you're going through.
And Ed, as you were talking about that, what would you tell someone who is caregiving how to cope with that grief? What are some things they could do?
I think with part of that is being present, as they often talked about in the documentary, because you're grieving what your loved one's going through. You're grieving the impact it has on your own life. You're grieving your dreams and maybe your hopes of a future, and all of that changes. And I think remembering that it's normal and keeping communication open with your loved ones and with the person who is sick, because everyone's going to do it and feel it differently, and being honest and present, knowing that it's a roller coaster ride and that that's okay, and that you just need to be where you are at that point. But then if you can, find a moment to take a breath. Maybe just take a little walk outside. And I think giving yourself grace and just knowing that you're doing the best that you can. And as long as you are doing it day by day and you're motivated by love, then you're doing the best that you can. And sometimes caregivers are so hard on themselves. So give yourself some grace, because sometimes you know your loved one that you're caring for, they really know you. And they understand when you get frustrated. But more than anything, they know that you love them and that you're doing your best. So give yourself that grace to believe that about yourself.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you. And I feel like what you have shared is really a good segue, Carolyn, into the importance of that self-care for caregivers. We know that it can be hard work. We know that it can be overwhelming. It can be consuming. And to Annette's point, caregivers often feel guilty when they try to take time for themselves. So what can you tell us about things we need to look for as a caregiver? What are the signs of that burnout before it leads to that stress, that chronic stress? And then how can we protect our mental well-being?
Okay. Caregiver burnout is a very serious thing. You're physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. You may not be able to sleep very well. Even if you do, you have maybe fatigue, and it's really serious when you sleep and you don't get rid of that fatigue. You start not enjoying all the activities in your life that you used to. You start feeling detached from the loved one you're caring for. You start isolating, maybe not going out with friends. You get irritable often, and you're sort of argumentative, and it's because you're so tired. And to be patient, like I have a husband that has dementia and had a stroke, and sometimes I get really tired, and when you do, like he's OCD, so he keeps on and on and on, and I have to really try to control not getting loud or curt with him. Because when you're really tired, it's easy. How many of us have gone off sometimes, and you really try to control that. The physical signs that you need to think about, if you, like me, what happens to me is when I know that I'm overextended in my life, I'll start getting tight in my chest, or my digestion, I won't, digest my food properly, or I'll get a headache or whatever. So we need to think about that. And as far as self-care, we need to be going to the doctor as caregivers every 3 to 6 months, our regular checkups, and even be sure too that, of course, the one you're caring for is going. Because the thing is, you need to talk to them about things that are happening to you. If you're getting irritable, you're tired, you can't get rested, that you're withdrawing or trying to isolate, and you'll push people away too, because sometimes caregivers, they feel like, well, they'll think that I am complaining about having to take care of the one I love. And so we isolate, and what do? I'm fine, right, that's what we say. And so it's hard to help them when they say they're fine, especially if they have adult children that are trying to check on them. And then the mom is taking care of the dad, and she's saying, oh, I'm fine. And so what I teach is be proactive and get in there and say, hey, Mom, go take a break. I'll take care of Dad or whatever. You just have to be proactive, because you can't go by them smiling and say, I'm fine. So if my daughter asks me how I'm doing, if I say I'm doing pretty good, that's a clue that I'm not. But if I'm saying I'm doing real good, or I say I'm doing fine, but if I say pretty good, then I'm not feeling that well that day. One of the things that I want to say, it's very serious if you let yourself fall into this, get into this long-term chronic stress and get into burnout. And long-term chronic stress is usually 6 months. And so what happens to you is you'll notice that you'll start getting like flu or colds more often. Your immune system goes down. It's been shown that you can get diseases from staying under this long-term chronic stress. Diabetes, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, depression. And then also what's really alarming about it, it can lead to addictions like alcohol, addictions to prescription drugs, the internet, and gambling, because people are looking for things to self-soothe. And so that's why it's so important when you start seeing those signs and symptoms to go ahead and talk to your doctor. They may say, you need to go to a therapist. You need to talk through some of these things, because like I go to therapy because there's things about my relationship, because when it's your spouse that you're losing, that you want to talk to them about, that you don't want to talk to your family about, or your daughter or your friends. And so I think therapy is very important. Some people don't believe in it, and I respect that. Also, therapy support groups are really good. Some of the things that I do for myself, the number one thing is to prioritize yourself without guilt. If you prioritize yourself, how many of you feel really uncomfortable to prioritize yourself? That's right, we do, because we're caregivers, we care about people, and we want to give. And what we do is, I call it my energy cup, and we just keep pouring and pouring, and we're not replenishing that energy, and you're keeping yourself in that long-term chronic stress. So my analogy is that we're eating from a 9-inch plate of it every day, of our time and energy. That's what we've got. But the problem is we have a 12-inch plate of responsibilities. So we're overextending ourselves. Some of the things that I do is I do meditation to calm myself. I take breaks during the day, like when my husband's resting or watching ball games. I rest. I run a nonprofit, but I still take time to rest, and I keep myself, I don't go over that threshold where my stomach starts hurting, because it's our responsibility to take care of our spouses or loved ones' caregiver, and that's what I do.
Thank you. That was some good information and good reminders for us, because we don't often think in those terms when we're caregivers.
That's right.
There were many important things that were highlighted in the documentary, and there was one line that was early on, and it said, "From the time we are born and throughout our lives, care is the first and most fundamental human connection that we have." And then later it pointed out the connection between caring for others and our own spirituality. And so, Tamika, I'm wondering, how does caregiving challenge or deepen one's spiritual journey?
Well, goodness, it's everyone on the panel has alluded to some things that are crucially important. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I was about 9 years old, and my mother owned a florist, and I spent a lot of time in funeral homes. And so I saw care from a different perspective at that age. And I was just a couple years younger than Jacob when my dad was diagnosed with a terminal form of lymphoma that was a result of his exposure to Agent Orange. And it was at that time that I began to learn what caregiving was when my mother moved with my father to Baptist Hospital for study treatments. And so being displaced from my home and being relatively new to my spiritual journey and my faith, I began to feel victimized by this journey. And so I would often isolate myself at the early age of 11 years old. And that was my time to decompress and to question things. I think it's so crucially important for us to recognize that we don't just see things in a linear perspective when it comes to spirituality with caregiving. Caregiving is such a beautifully diverse spectrum. And so I was fortunate that my father found a cure, and it was in my early 20s when I was married and had a child that he was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. And so caregiving took its turn for a second time in my life. It was about a year into that diagnosis when our third grader was diagnosed with autism. And so I became very angry at that time. I didn't understand why these things were happening to us, and I didn't understand how I could be doing caregiving so wrong. And so as I have, grown into my role as a pastor, and I've had the beautiful opportunity to see caregiving through the lenses of hospice caregivers, it's been important for me to recognize that we can give ourselves a break. Guilt is one of the top words that I hear from caregivers, especially after their loved one has passed. And we see that guilt because we look back from a lens of, looking back as 20/20 vision, right? And so we look back at those times and we start to map out all the things that we could have done differently. And so one of the things that I like to say to anyone really is give yourself permission to be okay. Because oftentimes we get so caught up and we get so wound up in caregiving that we really don't allow ourselves to just have a break in knowing that we're not going to get everything right. And so some of the ways that we can allow ourselves to do this is to question it. Go back to your why story. Why am I a caregiver? Is it because you had vows in your marriage? It's because you're a child of a parent who has loved you and given care for you? Is it because you had children and you had an oath to give care for that child? So as we go back in our why and we allow ourselves to question, some ways that we can take care of our spiritual health is to write a journal. Caregivers often don't take the time to get out to do things. We don't leave our homes. And so we can look for ways that we can take care of ourselves. I love the screaming in the car. The reason I love that is because sadness and guilt are not the only emotions that we deal with and we filter through spiritually. We deal with anger. We deal with joy. We deal with happiness. One of the beautiful ways that we cared for ourselves spiritually is we documented my dad's journey with dementia. And now we have a series of beautiful videos of our final years with him as he began cognitive decline. But if I had to say anything, and Annette alluded to this as well, it's that we allow ourselves to give our inner spirit grace to say, we may not have gotten it all right, and we may not be doing it right, and we're going to stumble and we're going to trip, but we are doing the best we can.
Thank you. Thank you. I think grace has been the underscore throughout everything that you all have shared tonight, and for me, that's a big takeaway, is giving oneself grace. The story of caregiving in America really is everyone's story, because we know that every day can look different and can present new challenges or new crises. So as we wrap up for this evening, I have one final question that I would like each of you to answer. What is the one lesson that caregiving has taught you that you believe everyone should carry forward from tonight?
I think so many times as caregivers we feel isolated and we feel like maybe no one understands or that no one is around to help. And we're isolated from our friends and what, as the documentary showed, our ordinary life that we had. And so many times I share with caregivers, remember, you're not alone. You're not alone on this journey, but please reach out for help, because people are often waiting just to help you. And a lot of times we don't realize that, but so many people want to help, but they may not know how to. So I tell caregivers, you're not alone, reach out for help, and it will be there.
I'm going to piggyback off of that, because I want to say, ask again. You know, a lot of times it takes a great deal of courage for a caregiver to reach out for help. And when they run into obstacles, whether that be a 30-minute phone call with Medicare, or that be someone saying that they're going to bring you dinner and neglecting to do so because they got busy in their life, then we take 3 steps backwards and we no longer want to ask for help. There was a situation early on in the documentary where the challenges became difficult for hospice care. And what I want to do is just call that lady and say, keep trying, because there is help out there. There are other organizations that are willing to stand in the gap of where this individual or this organization failed you. So ask again and again and again, and be the advocate, not only for your loved one that you're caring for, but for yourself.
I wanted to share something that my daughter said. She said, Mom, don't make me guess what you need, because she's so busy herself. She said, tell me and ask me, and that's very hard for me to do as a caregiver, to ask for help.
For me as a caregiver, it just really goes back to, I think what was helpful for me was to just know that all my emotions are a roller coaster ride, and that they weren't right or wrong, that I needed them. And it was okay to feel them, and to give myself, again, grace to be present in that moment with that emotion.
And all of us up here are professionals. We teach people how to be caregivers. That's what we've done in our careers. But when you make that transition from teaching someone how to be a caregiver to doing that yourself, it's a whole nother game. And like Annette and everyone has said, give yourself grace. That's the only thing that gets you through.
Thank you all so much. I really do appreciate you being here and having such thoughtful dialogue with us and providing insight and information that I think will be important for the audience to carry away. And I want to thank all of you who are here with us and those who have been joining us from home for spending the evening with us. And just as a reminder, our panelists will be right outside that door if you have any questions for them or would just like to speak with them. And again, thank you for being here tonight, and be safe traveling home. Good night.